Thank you very much for that introduction. And also thanks to RIETI for letting me share some of my thoughts on COVID. I've been doing some writing on Vox, a couple of columns, and what I'm doing in this talk is extracting some of the insights I had from that, but also from a book I wrote last year on COVID. I'm sorry, on Globotics before COVID, and it was translated into Japanese last year. And I also want to apologize for the conjectural nature of my presentation. After the very solid presentations by Professor Jorgensen and Professor Yano, I thought I would provide a more provocative presentation to stimulate thinking about what might happen in the long run with COVID, to sort of look much further beyond the horizon. So let me, sorry about that, my timer went off. There we go. Okay. So what I want to do is start by sharing my screen, and here we go. And this, okay, there we go. So what I want to do is start just to recall the title, COVID, Globotics, Development and the Future of Work. And it will really come in two parts. So the first part, I'm going to talk about what might happen in the advanced economies, and the second part, what might happen in the emerging economies, and using some kind of conjectural logic and some facts to extrapolate. So this is a warning you've had already. These are conjectures intended to provoke your thinking. So this is the basic idea about Globotics, and the idea is that digital technology is advancing very rapidly, and it's launching a change in globalization and a change in automation at the same time at a very fast pace. And both the globalization and the automation are affecting white collar and professional jobs, not just manufacturing jobs, as has been the case in the past couple of decades. And the argument is that this is coming faster than most think and in ways that few expect. So let me just elaborate a little bit on that, what I mean by automation. So I like the term white collar robots, because when we talk about robots or automation, most people see in their minds an industrial robot, say in a car factory. But there are white collar robots or software automation platforms, which are automating many service jobs in the offices. So you can think about this automation as happening in three levels of tasks: simple tasks, medium tasks, and high level tasks. So in the simple tasks, things like robotic process automation, one of the big platforms is a company called Blue Prism, is replacing relatively routine service work like processing expense forms, etc., looking at CVs for applications of jobs. There's also AI virtual assistants who can schedule meetings, chatbots who can answer your questions, things like that. The medium tasks, things like copy editing or graphic design or photo editing, these things are happening automated way, and they take a certain amount of tasks, medium skill. They would require somebody with a medium of skill, and many of them are being automated now. Not completely, but they're starting. And even at the high level, things like legal work of reviewing contract or litigation prediction. Financial service trading is done a great deal automated. There's also robo-financial advisors and fraud detection. Even in medicine, there's robo-health advice, say, for example, Babylon Health in the US, and image recognition. So in many of the tasks in our offices and professional and office jobs are being automated by white-collar robots. The second is the office tasks are also being globalized, and I'd like to call these migrants, telemigrants. Basic idea is that people in one nation working in offices in another. And this happens in two main ways right now. It's expanding fairly rapidly. Within companies, some companies like, say, American Express set up shared service centers in Argentina or Poland, where this is where they do back office offshoring, but it kind of stays within the company for security reasons and also for the team reasons. But other things like call centers, IT support can be outsourced to foreign companies. So in essence, this is globalization of service jobs. There's also an open market. For instance, there's international freelancing on platforms like Upwork and Freelancer. And some of the large Indian companies are providing open market the solutions for offshoring jobs. So that's the basic idea of automation of jobs and globalization of jobs. Now, the automation of jobs I don't think is so difficult to explain, since we've all seen things advance so quickly, like just to see how Word or Outlook can do so much more by themselves. But on the telemigration, I'd just like to make this particular point, that the Digitech is making it possible and the large wage differences are making it profitable. And when I talk about the Digitech, it's advanced telecoms, machine translation, cloud-based collaboration software, and things like this. So in some sense, there's an enormous incentive to globalize these jobs, to offshore some of the service sector, and the Digitech is now making it more possible. So what I want to point out, though, is that this won't look like factory closures that we've seen in manufacturing. So white-collar robots and telemigrants won't take over occupations. Like agricultural automation still needs farmers. Offices will still need humans. So back office offshoring will still need front office workers. So they're not going to replace entirely. But there may be fewer local humans needed per value of added. And the basic point is that telemigrants and white-collar robots are not quite as good as human, but they're a whole lot cheaper. So on the margin, there will be a substitution, and that substitution will accelerate with as the digital technology gets better. Okay, so here we come to COVID. I'm going to argue that COVID will accelerate these globotic trends, and I want to focus on 4 shocks that will last, that I conjecture will lead to an acceleration of this offshoring of office jobs and automation of office jobs. So the first thing is firings and rehirings. Millions of people have lost their job, and retaining a worker and rehiring a worker are not at all the same thing due to sunk costs and coordination issues. And since the companies have already broken the relationship with many, many workers, the idea that some of those workers would be replaced by software automation or offshoring is much more live now than it was before COVID. The second is that the digital transformation has accelerated. A large share of workers, managers, and firms in the G7 have learned to work remotely, and the companies have restructured themselves to make it easy to integrate remote people into their teams. Now that is in essence opening the door to telemigration. That's making it easy to hire people who are more remote than just around the corner, and also a great deal cheaper. Third, the social distancing makes the in-office humans more expensive than they were before. This is also true a little bit in manufacturing, but not as much. So social distancing requirements, which will last for most of the recovery, which could be a year or 2, these favor globots over in-office humans. So in other words, a number of companies, for example, here in Europe, are doing Team A and Team B. So at Credit Suisse, only half the workforce can go into the office every week, and the other half goes in the next week because they don't have enough office space. So in essence, the office space has become more expensive than it was before. And if you were thinking about automating some of those humans away or offshoring some of their jobs, right now there's an extra good reason to do that because of the shortage of office space or change in the relative price of humans versus globots doing this, in-person humans. And lastly, corporate debt has hit all incredible levels. And right now, maybe it's not so pressing, but very soon this corporate debt will lead cost cutting to become very urgent. And the idea that corporations who were reluctant to automate or offshore jobs, their resistance will be weakened by profit losses, and also this large corporate debt gives them a good excuse, and COVID gives them a good excuse to do things that they were probably planning to do anyways. So I think those 4 factors make all the things I'm talking about more of an issue now than they were before in the rich countries. Okay, so what I want to do now is turn to what it means for, to speculate what it means for emerging markets, globotics and development. And so I'm going to start with an assertion, a bold assertion, that Digitech is making factories jobless and offices globalized. So what do I mean by factories jobless? So the automation of factories is something that's been going on for decades and will continue. And of course, there will never be no humans in the factory, But as it goes along, there will be fewer and fewer humans actually working in the factories. And as a result, manufacturing won't be something that's a source of good jobs. Even in developing countries, the idea that large groups of people can walk off the farm into the factory and become more productive, which was a traditional industrialization-led development strategy, that's being phased out by automation. And remember, the robots cost pretty much the same all over the world. And as a consequence, the advantage of manufacturing in developing country is based on the labor cost share. And as automation reduces that labor cost share to very low, then it won't be worthwhile offshoring it to low-wage countries. At the same time, and similar technology is making it much easier to participate in offices virtually. The remote workers are becoming less remote, so to speak. And what I want to do is, how does that change development? Now, what does this mean for emerging economy development strategies? So let me just put out these set of facts to contrast how India has developed and how China has developed. So these are the sources of growth. This shows the contribution of total annual GDP growth in percentage points between 1990 and 2012. In services, India and China were about the same, 4.7, 4.3. If you look at manufacturing, you'll see that a lot of China's growth was based on manufacturing, but very little in India. And agriculture wasn't very important for either. So in some sense, the rapid growth in India was based more on services than it was in China. Or if to put it crudely, India did it on services, China did it on manufacturing. And what I'm going to suggest is that as automation makes manufacturing jobless, a lot more development models will look like India's and less than China's. Okay, so this is a net trade. So if we take exports and imports of services and imports minus exports, exports minus imports of goods, you'll see that India is running a trade surplus in services. In other words, they're exporting more, and that's what we call a revealed comparative advantage. But on goods, they're importing more, so they have a revealed comparative disadvantage. In China, it's exactly the opposite. China is showing a revealed comparative advantage in goods. That doesn't shock anybody, but a revealed comparative disadvantage in services. And so Costa Rica and Philippines are a little bit more like India, and there's lots of examples like China, but these are two classic ones. So let me make a couple policy conjectures based on this. First of all, the emerging market miracle will continue and spread. So we should think service-led, not manufacturing-led development. Now that's important because manufacturing-led development is extremely difficult and it's very agglomeration intense. In fact, where countries have developed on manufacturing is very circumscribed in terms of geography. It's basically around East Asia, around Europe, or around America. South America and Africa have been largely left off manufacturing-led development. But service-led development is nowhere near as constrained by agglomeration economies because the scale economies are not as large. Moreover, the necessity to be near technological hubs like Japan, Germany, or the US is less because the shipment delays and time are basically zero when you're talking about services. So the idea here is think India, not China, and it will spread. I would also conjecture that South America will provide these services for North America, and so it will give a continent like South America more of an edge than they had before. And Africa provides services for Europe, and so help Africa catch up, especially starting with the middle-income countries like Kenya and South Africa and Nigeria, and Southeast Asia for Northeast Asia. Now, with this graph, I want to kind of explain why service-led development is easier in some sense. So before, comparative advantage of emerging markets was based on low-cost labor or relatively low-cost labor. But they would take that low-cost labor, put it into a factory. The workers would make goods and the goods would be exported. But really those exported goods were just a veil for the low-cost labor. And with services, telemigration, the low-cost labor is exported directly into the offices of the rich countries, without having to go through all the complexity of manufacturing and ports and markets and brands and all the difficulties you have in manufacturing is much less in services, because services aren't subject to this kind of agglomeration, or at least not as much. So that's the idea. Development will look more like India than China. So as part of that, I'd like to point out that we should think about service value chains, not just global value chains. So global value chains are normally associated with manufacturing, like cars. But service value added is also in a chain-like behavior. And traditionally, it was all put together in the same companies, often in the same building. But digital technology has, even before COVID, led to a disintegration of the value chain, where some parts of the value added in the service value added chain have been outsourced, either to remote places domestically or internationally. And as digital technology proceeds, sorry about that. As it proceeds, I think we'll see more offshoring of service jobs. And we need to think about cities, services, and training, not factories, capital goods, and technology. That is, governments have to have a different mindset when they're trying to develop the export of services rather than manufactured goods. So the last thing, to end on a down note, I think telemigration may cause a new backlash against globalization in advanced economies. So it's worth pointing out that 60 to 90% of people in advanced economies work in services, and few of them have ever experienced automation or globalization. But this, I believe, is advancing, and I think COVID has advanced it even further. So we may find a backlash against these kind of telemigrants. So with that, I'll just stop and show you a picture of my book. Thank you very much.